Welcome to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. This morning, the committee will be holding a question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. And can I now ask our clerk, Lauren, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. No apologies have been received this morning.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if any members have any other interest to declare? No, thank you. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of January and the 25th of January 2023 to be signed by me as correct records? Yes, thank you. Can we note the completed ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings?
Noted.
Thank you. Can we note the recent action taken by me under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members to agree the committee's report on probation services in London?
Noted.
Thank you. Can we note the response from the Mayor of London to the committee's report?
Noted.
Thank you. So we now move on to our main item of business, and I'd like to welcome our guests. We have Sophie Linden, Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Dame Lynne Owens, Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service, and Diana Luchford, Chief Executive Officer for MOPAC. Good morning, all. Thank you very much for coming, and massive congratulations to Dame Lynne, who is now officially our Deputy Commissioner of Policing. So, very good. Congratulations to you, and it's good news for us all. Now, I believe you'd like to start by just having a few words to us.
Thank you. It's absolute coincidence, isn't it? I was asked to appear before this panel not knowing that I was going to be confirmed in post Monday just gone. So it's an absolute pleasure to be sitting before you today as the Deputy Commissioner Permanent of the Metropolitan Police Service. As you know, Sir Mark has a very clear agenda for the Met, so I am delighted to be part of his leadership team, supporting him and them and the officers and staff of the Metropolitan Police Service in renewing policing by consent with more trust, less crime and high standards. I thought I'd just give you an indication of what I think I'm focusing on at the moment, and some of this will inform the conversation that we will go on to have. So the first thing to say is we've spent the first time that we've been together in the Met developing our turnaround plan, and that is on the agenda today, but that's the plan by which we're going to transform the Metropolitan Police Service, and we are really keen to receive feedback from, of course, yourselves as members of the committee, but also all of the communities of London, so that the plan that we have in place represents everybody's experience of what they'd like to see for policing in London. I should stress that it's a first draft of the plan. We intend to relaunch it at sometime in April because we know that we've got big further reports coming, for example, from Baroness Casey, and there will be things that we want to reflect in that. But of course, for now, every single day, there are officers and staff of the Met performing for the communities of London. So to that end, I'm focusing on two particular things currently. So in terms of service to the public, I'm concerned about victim care. If you look at the HMIC FRS report into the Metropolitan Police Service, that's one of the areas they're concerned about. So the service we provide from METCC, from our control room, but also the direct service we give to victims. I was pleased to attend a session chaired by the London's Victims Commissioner with a whole host of victims who gave me their direct feedback on the experiences they have, and that's going to be a really important part of our work going forward. Secondly, in terms of service to London, I pride myself on being a career detective and have arrived here having spent 6 years almost running the National Crime Agency. So our absolute focus on targeting offenders proactively is very high on my agenda, particularly as they relate to violence against women and girls. And as well as serving the communities of London, of course, as leaders, we serve the officers and staff that we are responsible for. So Mark has been very clear about our expectations on our approach to standards, and we've given a number of public commitments about the review work that's ongoing that we will report on by the 31st of March. But the opposite side of that coin is we have to set up the good and hard-working officers and staff of the Met to succeed. And you may have seen some of the comments that Sir Mark has made in the last 24 hours about pay as part of that, and I'm very happy to take any questions. Just short opening comments from me, Chair. I very much look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. I mean, before we start the questions, you've broached on this now. We do need to support the tens of thousands of really good officers out there who must be absolutely devastated by some of the revelations that are emerging. Is there any way that we could, that I know there's lots in the pipeline, is there any way we could just get it all out there, or the majority of things out there? Because it seems the minute we calm down, you know, the minute things start to settle and you think, right, here we go, something else comes out, and that is so damaging for policing, which none of us want. It doesn't do any of us any good.
So we're doing two things, aren't we? We're looking backwards and reviewing some historic decisions that were made, and we're also setting a different standard going forward. I think when we come to report on the 31st of March, we'll give you a very clear picture on what looking backwards looks like. But I do think there will be more cases to come, and I think one of the challenges that we have with, frankly, the criminal justice system and how long it is taking to get cases through court, I think stones we unturned today and behaviour we uncover, cases that we put together, actually won't be going to court for another year, another 2 years, maybe even another 3 years. But you are absolutely right in that it is soul-destroying for the hard-working officers who care as much as you do and I do and the communities of London do about making sure that we maintain the highest possible standards. So I'd love to be able to say to you, Chair, you know, give it 6 months, this will all be over. I honestly don't think it's going to be that easy or that simple.
No, I regretfully agree with you, but let's press on and show everybody that the Met has or is beginning to change. So I'll now go on to the questions, and the first section is on the Met's turnaround plan. And I'll start with you, Diana. Thank you for attending. We don't like summoning people, so can I assume that if in future we'd like you to attend, you will just come without us going through summons?
Of course, yes.
Lovely. That's good news for us all.
I did write to you to confirm that, and I would have attended anyway had you not summoned me today.
Well,
had you invited me, I mean.
Yes, yes, that's good to hear. So in December 2022, the Commissioner told the Budget and Performance Committee that the Met had not yet finally costed the budget for reform, and that a further few tens of millions would be needed. Does MOPAC and the Met now have a better understanding of the budget that's needed? And what does this include, and how much will it cost? We'll need you to put your microphone on, Fine. Would you like me to ask the question again?
No, I had the question, sorry. So clearly the 23-24 budget has already made provision for activity related to the turnaround plan, and in particular money has been invested to increase the number of PCSOs by 500, which will reverse a decline in PCSO numbers over the last year, and that is 26.8 million. The other thing that clearly is a priority within the turnaround plan and is a priority for the Mayor is ensuring that we are investing in measures to raise standards and reform the culture of the Met, including a new leadership academy which will provide enhanced training, and 15 million has been allocated for that. Lynne has already touched upon the work that is being done to improve Met CC, and 2.5 million has been provided to increase capacity in Met CC. And we will continue to do everything in our power to make sure that policing is supported financially, including by, obviously, government investment as well as City Hall investment.
Okay, you said that the PCSO numbers had fallen. How much? I thought that was fairly steady.
No, I
So
think the numbers declined quite significantly over the past 10 years.
So what are we down to now, Diana?
About 1,300, I think.
So what's the aim to get up to?
Well, we want to increase the number by another 500, so that would bring us up to nearer 2,000.
Okay, all right then. I've written that down. Thank you. Deputy Commissioner, the Mayor's announced £14 million investment to accelerate cultural reform in the Met. So do you think that's going to be enough?
So this isn't about money on its own, and I need to make that explicitly clear. Some of this is about how the leaders of the organisation, from myself and the Commissioner and our leadership team, right down to our sergeants and first-line managers, set the expectation and tone. The money that we have asked for is to do basically three things. The first thing is, actually, if you read the first stage of Baroness Casey report, she talks about the reduced capacity to support first-line managers from HR. Our HR functions, that's diminished and been outsourced over the years. And actually, when it comes to dealing with very difficult culture cases, sometimes our first-line managers need some support. So we want to increase the very tactical, hands-on capacity that's available to support them. The second thing that we've committed to do in this financial year is to ensure all of our first-line managers, particularly sergeants, have training in leadership. At the moment, we've got some brilliant people who are prepared to step up to the plate, but we don't train them in the way that you would rightly expect us to. And then we want to start to build towards a Met Leadership Academy. So whether you start your leadership journey right through to people like I and the Commissioner, you can be confident of tiered training throughout your service, including our BCU commanders, who, if you compare their training to, for example, what other organisations like the military might get, there is absolutely no comparison. The money that we have in this year starts the programme of work. I think we will say there is more to come, including from us in reprioritising and setting efficiency targets for the Metropolitan Police Service. But money's not the only answer, but this is certainly some good steps in the right direction.
Okay, do you think that Hendon is a good place to put that academy? Because it is, I mean, actually it would be easy for me to get to, but I do appreciate how difficult it is for everybody else to.
So we haven't decided yet where the Leadership Academy will be physically based. As you know, that the Hendon site is a very good site for the Metropolitan Police Service, and it is a world-renowned brand. But we're doing work now with education providers, with the voluntary sector, the private sector, and other London-based bodies to actually understand what would a good leadership academy look like. We want to liaise with people like the College of Policing and the National Crime Agency, who also have their own requirements, and when we understand the requirements, we'll decide where the right base is. Personally, and I have to be careful, I'm not relying on the fact I trained at Hendon, so that place really does mean something to me. But it is a good site, and at the moment it contains two things. So it contains some people in training, but it contains some other specialist functions. And I think if we want to set the right values tone for an organisation, actually having one location where you are told what the right dress standards are, you are told what the right behaviours are, you are pulled up on your individual behaviour, that sets the tone from the outset, and it's that we need to reinforce.
Okay, fine, thank you for that. We're now moving over to Assembly Member Dr. Sahota for questions.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is to the Deputy Mayor. How confident are you that the £40 million proposed by the Mayor will ensure that Londoners will have a police service that they deserve?
I've got a lot of confidence, absolutely confident in the new leadership of the Met in terms of the proposals that have been put forward around the Leadership Academy and what we've talked about in terms of PCSOs, as well as improving capacity within the contact centre. And I am confident in the drive to succeed. It's not going to be easy, it's going to be challenging, and it's going to take time. And I think that's a message that is coming across from not just the Deputy Commissioner and the Commissioner. And it goes back to the Chair's question around how long is it going to take to weed out all those officers that should not be in the Met. It will take time, but I have confidence that that is going to happen, and that the performance of the Met is also going to improve, and that we will come out of Engage.
Right, thank you. And Diane, how will you be monitoring the delivery of these reforms and that the money is spent effectively and delivers the value for money for Londoners?
We will be monitoring that through our usual oversight structures. So through the oversight board, but of course the delivery, the monitoring of Engage is the responsibility of HMIC, and they will do that through the PPOG process, and we will support the Met in that.
And Deputy Mayor, there's been a further £13.8 million given to policing, has been announced recently thanks to the larger than expected business rates. And we obviously welcome this wholeheartedly. But can you tell the committee how will this money be spent on? Or what will it be spent on?
So some of that has topped up the money that was previously announced around the Leadership Academy. 3.3 million has topped that up to make that £15 million. The rest of the money is, some of it has gone to the Violence Reduction Unit to ensure that the work that they're doing continues. And then MOPAC has also been given some of that money to, for example, increase the work we've been doing with the Metropolitan Police and partners around tackling drugs and the harm that drugs cause in communities, an extension of Project ADA, for example, but also more work on violence against women and girls.
Deputy Commissioner, first of all, congratulations on your appointment. You obviously talked about supporting police officers, not only expecting high standards from them, but supporting them. And part of that is to increase your HR support in the Metropolitan Police. Do you have a measure of how much more staff is required in the Met HR Directorate, and when will this be in place?
So I can't give you exact figures yet because we're doing the work. We've only just had confirmation on the first stage of funding. So we will build the first stage of that. The important thing is making sure it's proximate to where the officers are based, and that's the thing that's currently missing at the moment. It's in a distanced, outsourced, telephone-based contract, and it's clear from what so Mark and I have been listening very closely to what our leaders have been telling us, and what they need is something a bit closer to where they are physically based, and that will be the priority.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you very much, and congratulations, Deputy Commissioner. It's great you've been made permanent. Can I pick up a few things on the turnaround plan? One thing that I read in it that was really interesting is, and to be fair, several commissioners have mentioned this over the years, is the amount of time the police spend dealing with people with mental health issues. And I'm just wondering, what conversations have you started around this with the NHS? Obviously, the ambulance service recently announced they're only going to allow a limited time before leaving a patient in A&E because of the pressures they're under. Are you looking at a similar sort of measure?
Thank you for the congratulations and for the question. So if you were to talk to our hard-working frontline officers and staff, they would talk to you about the amount of time they spend not only responding to initial mental health calls or picking up demand from the ambulance services, but also then how long it takes them to hand over people who are often in crisis. The important thing to say, of course, if this was you or me or we had a family member that was in mental health crisis, we would ask ourselves, is a uniformed police officer the right person to respond to that incident when actually what they need is care? There will be some instances where we might be the right people to respond if there is an immediate threat that they are posing to someone else, and sadly some people who are in crisis are in that place. But there is no doubt that the percentage of time we are spending at mental health calls at the moment is impacting on our ability to respond to the things that are our core functions, responding to crime, responding to disorder, supporting victims. Per average mental health call, an officer will spend 14 hours of their time at a call, and the work that Sir Steve Howes is currently doing on behalf of the Home Office will soon, I think, be announcing publicly some detail, and they've specifically looked at some of the Metropolitan Police data in that regard, and it's quite startling when you then read it across to other incidents. We're very keen to be a Metropolitan Police Service leadership team that is not arrogant and doesn't believe we have the answers to everything, based here in London. So there's some great work that's been done by Humberside Police, who have managed to significantly reduce demand to their service, whilst ensuring the people get the right level of support from the health services. So we've sent a team up there to see how they've done it, and their chief officers coming down to present to us what that looks like. I personally have had a meeting with the health structures in London, and expressed our concern, and I think we will get to a stage imminently where we look to implement the London version of the Humberside model. Of course, all the structures here make it slightly more complicated, but we have to get there in the interests of both the people that have the mental health crisis, but also our frontline officers and staff.
But ultimately, is it going to rely on the NHS agreeing to put more resources in or sign up to some sort of service level agreement, if you like?
I think both those things.
Yeah. And are they receptive? I mean, the NHS is complex in London. I regularly see police vehicles as well as ambulances queuing outside King's College Hospital, for example, up the road. It's a huge issue. Are they all responding well?
So they, in terms of responding well, they will talk about an intent to do this piece of work with us. I think the thing that we will want to push them on is the speed of that intent and the funding allocations that might go with it. Our understanding is there is some money from central government. We haven't yet seen how that's being allocated in London, but the initial response is positive. One of the things we are saying in the Met at the moment is, let's not use our size and our complexity as an excuse for inaction. Mm-hmm. And I think on this one, I'd be saying the same to health. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. We'll watch that with interest. I wanted to tease out some more on the Leadership Academy, and you've already touched on that today. Obviously, the Commissioner said the Academy will deliver a week's leadership development for every leader in the Met every year. What else will it offer? Can you give us a bit more of a picture of what this is going to offer and what difference it's going to make?
So the commitment to the 5 days leadership training in this year was made actually before we'd conceived of the need for something broader. That was based on his and my very early conversations with frontline sergeants saying, we want to get this right. But we haven't actually ever really been. We've done quite a lot of training on who we are and what we believe in, but the tangible training on how do you do an appraisal. The numbers of people who have had an annual appraisal in the Met, how good are you doing? Where do you see your career going to? How much do we value your service? Is currently very low, between 16 and 19%, and that's frankly not good enough. But we've never really invested in our frontline supervisors and said, this is what a good appraisal looks like. These are the questions that you should be asking. So in the first 5 days, we've taken some learning from the College of Policing. They've got a programme that has been rolled out to other forces in the country that gets some really good feedback. So we've taken that on board. We're also thinking about how we get the community voice, which is different to elsewhere in the country, into that programme. Your question about the full academy, we aren't yet at the stage where I can sort of hand on heart say, right, it's going to offer 10 programmes, this is what they will look like. My expectation is that it will prepare people better for promotion and stepping up to different levels. It will prepare people to understand what it is to police London, so we will need community and victim impact. It will teach people how to use the evidence base differently, which we've never really done in London, and we need to find a way to embed through all of it the cultural expectations we have of Metropolitan Police officers and staff.
Yes, and how to challenge
exactly.
Effectively. Have you been looking internationally? Because, I don't know, Canada I'd looked at, and they have a really good programme that shows sort of executive sort of programme mentorship, strategic foresight. They seem to have a really good programme. You can see some of it online. Have you been looking at those examples to see if there's best practice you can take from elsewhere?
That's definitely our intention. One of the privileges I had when I was Director General for the National Crime Agency is that I was the Five Eyes rep for the UK, so working with the FBI, the RCMP in Canada, Australian Federal Police, and colleagues in New Zealand too. And there are definitely some best practice examples and questions about what Quantico delivers. It delivers some really good international programmes. In history, we've sent some of our people on. We're also looking at other sectors in the UK, including business schools, because the other thing that we need to get better at teaching our people is good use of public money, management, leadership. So it's, yes, we will go far and wide, including internationally, to try and frame something that meets not only today's needs, but the future needs too.
And what's the sort of timescale for this? Because you've got your initial sort of basic course, which you'll then want to get rolled out, but then all these other programmes and so on. What's your sort of thinking for the immediate and then these wider programmes?
So if you look at the whole turnaround programme, it has 9 priorities in it, but they are each massive. This is an important one, but there's nothing in there that's not important. So in this financial year, we see ourselves delivering the 5 days worth of training and designing what the academy may look like, with a view to building that into the budget for next year. So I think within this financial year, we'll be able to tell you this is what the design of the academy looks like, with a view to it starting at full tilt or at faster pace by next year, so that we build something right.
So it'll be the next so 24, 25
Yes.
is where. So this year everyone will have this training, the sort of basic core, and then it will be the different bespoke units. Yes. Okay, that's really interesting. I'd like to see how that develops. You've mentioned the College of Policing. How key are they to delivering this? Are they going to be running some of the courses? What's their role in all of this?
So the College of Policing set standards. They tend not to run delivery products themselves, but they are absolutely critical to us. The Chief Executive of the College of Policing, Andy Marsh, sits on our turnaround board. When we've been looking at things like our recruit training, he's been very forward-leaning in offering us review support. They're currently going through a process themselves to look at the most senior level training, so that what used to be the Police National Assessment Centre, that becomes the strategic command course that all of us have to do before we can meet the most senior leadership positions. They're currently reframing that programme. That one's particularly important because to appoint anybody into a senior job through regulations and guidance, they have to have been through that course. We have a seat on his reform table. So what we will seek to do is take products that work for London where they are good enough and look to be a pathfinder, but working very, very much hand in glove with them.
And then you touched on this idea of the community voice being key to this programme. Have you any thoughts on how you see that?
We do some of it already, but I think we need to expand it. At the moment, I think last year or the year before last, we moved to a place where before probationary officers go into training, they attend some sessions at Linden with community members. We've enhanced that in the last year, so once they've done their training and done some time on the BCUs, then they revert back to Linden and they do a whole 2 weeks where we have community members talking about their lived experiences from all different perspectives. But that happens at the beginning of someone's service. I think trying to find a way to get the right strategic insight at the right time and position in people's careers is the next stage, but I think we've got something to build on.
And from a MOPAC point of view, maybe Diana, do you want to comment on how you see working with London's communities to develop police leaders of the future?
As you know, through the Mayor's Action Plan, we have already enhanced community involvement in the training of police officers. In the context of the turnaround plan, MOPAC has been helping the Met to reach out to harder to reach communities. We've been suggesting people that they may wish to engage with on the plan in order to get their feedback. So that includes the VORG sector, but also other groups like deaf and disabled and other harder to reach cohorts. So we're supporting them in that way to make sure they're getting that voice into the feedback for the turnaround plan.
And then Sophie, in terms of thinking about, have you had any thoughts on how London's communities can help with this programme in the Leadership Academy?
I mean, just to add to what Diana said, I mean, you know that the Mayor invested, coming out of the Mayor's Action Plan, invested in community-led training, which is, as the Deputy Commissioners pointed out, is up and running, which is great, really, really good. I think we have to have those discussions, don't we? In whatever way we can support, we will support. And, you know, if that £15 million needs to be spent on more community training, that's a proposal. And if in the future we need to do more support, absolutely, because one of the biggest feedbacks we've always had from the community is they want to and are interested in working alongside the Met to make sure that the officers that are serving them understand their communities and understand them.
Okay, thank you. And Deputy Commissioner, can I just ask you, in terms of communications, it's really important that officers are able to communicate and knowing what information to communicate and so on and how to. And that's obviously very apparent in the last week with the terrible Nicola Bulley case and the information that was provided and communicated, you know, a lot of questions to be asked. Are you looking at some sort of module around improving communications and generally reviewing how the Met operates in this space?
So communications, and it's a massive topic, isn't it, in its own right, because every single day officers interact directly with individual members of the community using their personal styles, and authenticity in public service really matters. But so does clarity of messaging, so does transparency. So that's how Londoners experience it every day. But also we, the Met, have a voice, and so Mark and I are very keen. You all know I'm active on Twitter and a big user of social media. I think finding more modern methods to more quickly and succinctly explain, both respond to the things where rightly the media are holding us to account because we haven't done ourselves proud, or actually where there's a version of an event that is playing out on social media where actually we know there's another side and we should be bolder and braver in getting that out there earlier, or just very plainly talking about work that happens every day. I was struck, I can't remember if it's last week or the week before last, we ran a brilliant operation looking at vehicle crime, and I simply retweeted it from my account, and a councillor very much welcomed it, responded to my message saying, you know, catalytic converter theft, vehicle crime is really important to my neighbourhood, but I didn't know the Met were doing this, and this is brilliant stuff. So getting that balance right between being an open and transparent service where we recognise we don't always get things right and there are some things we need to change, but at the same time making sure the good work of the many outstanding officers doesn't get diminished by the things that we are doing wrong is definitely a work in progress. And I do think giving confidence to our people to talk plainly is something we need to work on. The Commissioner and I met with the Crime Reporters Association to talk about actually what's the relationship between the Met and the media at the moment. You know, I was here in 2011 and 2012 when there was the Leveson inquiry, and their very strong feedback to us was, look, we have an important role in holding you to account, which of course they do, but actually there is more for you to do in being straightforward with us about where you think it's going well, and actually we would love to have more legitimate access to your senior investigating officers, to your people that are supporting victims. So we are working hard to facilitate that, quite hard in an organisation that you haven't trained to do it. So your point about how do we, as well as training people with technical skills on investigation, how do we enhance the abilities of our senior investigating officers, our neighbourhood officers, to engage directly with the community, with opinion formers and with the media is important.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think getting messaging out, I've said so for a long time, is so important. And I do follow you on Twitter, as you well know. Dr. Sahota, you wanted to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to talk about this, but this mental health issue, and the background is in the NHS, right? That I understand that when you put a section 106 on a patient, right, they have to be delivered to a place of safety within 6 hours of the section. And you're saying it takes 14 hours to hand over these patients to the NHS?
So it's section 136. Yes. So effectively it's 14 hours from start to finish. So that's it, the 14. The clock doesn't start when they enter the place of safety. We start the clock from the moment they deploy to the call. Right. So it's from the start of the call to the point of handover.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing, of course, is that, look, I welcome this idea of appraisals. Okay, will you be looking at 360 feedback as part of your appraisal processes? Yes,
so we already do some elements of 360-degree appraisal. I'm a big fan of 360-degree appraisal. I've done it for many years. It's as good as your preparedness to give it to people that you say aren't going to say nice things about you. There's a risk if you don't do it well. that you hear the feedback you want to hear, because you give it to people who are going to tell you nice things. But there is definitely a role for 360-degree appraisal as part of the appraisal processes. But also, we're trying something a bit different at the moment with how we appoint senior leaders. It's something I tried previously in the National Crime Agency and when I was a Chief Constable in Surrey Police. So we've made our most recent appointees go through what we call a people's panel. So a panel of officers and staff from the Met who receive a presentation from the person going for the job, and then have an opportunity to get into a question and answer session, giving feedback into the appointment process that in these instances were chaired by the Commissioner and I, and fascinating to see the things that they were picking out about leaders, and that formed a really important part in who we appointed.
Good. And just lastly, and look, I think the business schools have great leadership skills and expertise in this area, and you want to tap into that, which is excellent. And I suspect the Leadership Academy will be something which officers will access right throughout their careers in different stages. And establishing the culture of organisation is very important. And I come from an organisation which has had a lot of management culture move into it, but they had challenge. That's the NHS I'm talking about. Is how to get this culture right in an organisation like the NHS and the police service. Numbers don't mean everything. How do you add a value in terms of pounds, right, of the good you're doing? And I hope that culture doesn't come into the Metropolitan Police, because we need to guard against that, right? And I'm really conscious of that, right? That business schools have a lot of skills, and I went to business schools in my career. But how do you balance up those things? How do you set the right culture in the organisation? Because that's going to take time, and once you embed the culture, changing cultures can be very difficult, right? How do you want to guard against that? We don't get the business mentor, school mentor into the Metropolitan Police.
So as you rightly say, numbers matter, but quality matters more. It's a leadership responsibility of Sir Mark and I to make sure that we haven't got people that are delivering numbers for numbers' sake, and actually we will do that in the performance framework we are developing. Quality is mattering now as much as quantity. You'd have heard people present to this panel before about whether crime's going up or going down, and whether detection rates are going up and down. They're just numbers. Important numbers, I'm not diminishing those at all, but what's equally important is what the public attitude survey is telling us about the confidence of Londoners, and we know that's been in decline, and it's particularly been in decline in black communities and amongst women, but also victim satisfaction and victim satisfaction data. And at the moment the victim satisfaction data is focused on a subset of crimes, actually things like sexual offending and other areas where we want to improve our response. Much harder actually to survey because of the sensitivity understandably of those crimes, but be reassured, quality is going to matter as much as quantity. And you are right, culture change absolutely does not happen overnight, but it is set by the top of the organisation, and our expectation publicly that we are serving the public well, but also internally that we can have open and honest conversations with one another, regardless of the hierarchy, about what's working well and what's not working well. And I could give you a list of the things that frontline officers and staff have said to me since I have been in this post, which now feature as subsets of the turnaround plan in areas where we need to improve. But embedding that culture so you don't only hear the loudest voices, you hear the introverts, you hear voices that are not the majority in the organisation, is absolutely the culture we need to encourage in accordance with our values.
I love the fact that you're going to have panels with question and answers, because you can then really find out who knows what they're talking about or not, or who's just telling you what you want to hear. That's really good. So now we're moving on to the second section, which is police recruitment and training, and questions are going to be started off by Assembly Member Devonish.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations from me, Deputy Commissioner, in your new appointments. My first question, please, can you provide an update on what actions the Met is currently taking to ensure it meets its recruitment targets for police officers, please?
Thank you for the congratulations. I have to put my glasses on for this, so I'll give you accurate numbers. Last time I appeared before this committee, I was an assistant commissioner and I didn't need the glasses, so that's a measure of time for you. So with the police uplift programme, at the end of this financial year, we wanted to have been a full-time equivalent headcount of 35,550 officers. Over the last 3 years, we've recruited 9,400 officers towards the overarching target, and this year, so the question that you specifically asked me, we have recruited 2,796 officers with a further 478 booked on further intakes. That's 79% of the recruitment requirement of this year's recruiting target, which is 4,077. But, and there is a big but here, our current monthly application to be a uniformed police constable is less than 40% of our growth requirement. So at the end of December, so December 2022, there were only 1,950 candidates in the recruiting pipeline. And then when you overlay that with increases in attrition, so attrition dropped during COVID. That's a pattern that I definitely saw in the National Crime Agency too, so I think it was a national pattern during the pandemic, but our attrition is now increasing. So when you add our attrition to our slowing down of recruitment, the public figure that the Commissioner has given in the statement he made yesterday is we fear that we could miss our recruitment target by about 1,000 officers, and it may be higher. Now, I would not want anybody in this committee to think we weren't trying hard. We are deeply grateful to have had such a significant uplift in police officers, but we need to understand in some detail why it is that the numbers of people are applying, and indeed the numbers of people that are leaving are higher than we would want them to be. And we have 2 pieces of significant work looking at both those things that we are expecting to report imminently, and I'm very happy either I or the Commissioner to come back to this committee and talk to you more about what they're telling us. We do know from what we've been told so far that pay does appear to be a factor, particularly here in London, not the only factor, and we would not want to be thought to be shroud waving by raising that as a point, but it is a factor with the cost of living. But there are other things too. Sort of work-life balance. In this financial year, we do ask a lot of our officers. We change their duties at late notice. I touched a few minutes ago on the things that our front line were telling us, and the Deputy Mayor has heard me say this before. We're an organisation of 44,000 people, and yet every single operational team you visit will say, we are under establishment, we don't have the people that we thought we had. And actually, the more we pick as a new team on where our people actually are, where we think they are, and where they actually are not currently the same. And the impact on that for frontline officers, I'm giving you an example, this isn't a specific, but if you were on a response team on a BCU and you thought your establishment was 50 police officers, and every time you turn up there's never any more than 30, and you feel like you're going from call to call to call and you don't think you're giving the service that you want to, over time that becomes wearing, doesn't it? And you think it's not quite the service you joined. So not a glowing picture, lots of hard work from our HR teams, but more to do on understanding why we're in the position we're in.
Perhaps we could have a separate meeting on this. I do think it's the most important thing, not just in the police, actually across every profession at the moment. Recruitment and retention is a huge issue everywhere, because we have got a great jobs market, which of course is a positive thing. But I'll move on. Again to you, Deputy Commissioner, when do you expect the Met to have recruited the additional 1,500 PCSOs the Mayor announced recently? Will this additional recruitment burden have an impact on the work the Met is doing to recruit police officers?
So to take the last one first, so we do see a pipeline from PCSOs into police constable roles, but we see that as a positive thing, not a negative thing. So we don't think the recruitment target for PCSOs will impact on the officer headcount target in the way the question might describe. To grow and replace those leaving through natural attrition, the figures which we've worked out, our recruitment target for next year, so 23-24, will be 678 PCSOs. So that's the new investment, the 500 plus the roughly 178 that we would expect to lose through natural attrition, retirement, etc. We have backloaded our workforce plan, obviously, because of the way the budget cycle works. We've only just had confirmation of the exact figure. So we expect to start to deliver the new, so the 500 PCSOs from September onwards. We've already increased our advertising, and we will be doing a lot more publicly, and of course with this committee, on what the strongest ever neighbourhood policing we're hoping to look like. We've started to remodel our PCSO training so it aligns to the national curriculum which has been set by the College of Policing. The additional thing that we will include on the national training is the London context, the community context that we've already spoken about. The redesign will take between 3 and 4 months, so that will work. So the new PCSO training offer will be ready in June, and because we want to try and deal with this attrition issue for PCSOs that we're seeing with police officers, we're also doing a piece of work about what the development offer for a PCSO looks like. It looks quite static for them at the moment, so we do need to start to do some thinking for that. So we're confident in the plan for next year, but because of all the things we've just said about the recruitment market in total, it will be interesting to see whether we achieve the aims we hope to.
So just to press you on that, the Mayor is saying he's going to have 1,500 more before the end of this term, which is May next year. Do you think that is feasible?
Sorry,
500 additional, yeah, sorry, 500, yes. Do you think that's feasible?
I think that is feasible.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question's from me to Deputy Mayor. It's nice to see you back, Deputy Mayor. HMI Matt Parr has said that the Met has lowered standards and that there is a risk of recruiting the wrong people to meet the recruitment targets. So what's your reaction to that?
Well, the very simple reaction is that the Met hasn't reduced standards. There are very clear standards for recruitment set by the College of Policing, in particular on literacy, which I believe was being referred to. There's very, very clear standards that you have to hold level 2 functional skills in English language. There's been absolutely no change. I will be meeting Matt Parr soon, and we'll ask him why he thinks that, and if necessary, take that forward.
Absolutely, because it obviously rang alarm bells with all of us. He actually said that you'll hear people from the training school say that they're taking in significant numbers of people who are, on paper at least, functionally illiterate in English, and therefore just writing up crime reports has become quite difficult in some areas. That's specifically what he says.
I read that. I read the article. I obviously went and double-checked with the Met about the standards of literacy. There has been absolutely no change. Level 2 functional skills in English language, I believe, is a good pass in GCSE English. Those officers, those recruits are very literate, and there's been no diminishment of standards.
Okay, thank you. Have you found any issues with people not having a capacity to write reports, etc., with their English?
So when that report came out, we were surprised to see it. I personally spoke to Matt Parr because we haven't been inspected on those standards. He confirmed that the conversation with the newspaper came about when he was talking to them about vetting standards. He confirmed that no, they hadn't inspected in that area, and he thought the article had conflated a number of comments that he had made, which gave me some level of reassurance, because I was worried that he had access to data that we weren't currently seeing. I know there's been concern actually voiced by the National Black Police Association about what the background to those comments could be, and we of course know that Baroness Casey saw some systematic bias in some of our in some of the systems and processes that the Met engage with. We have got a rigid approach to our Regulation 13, which is our ability to review and then basically get rid of probationers who aren't performing to the right standards for the communities of London. Within that, there are issues about individual, but not systematic, individual ability to write or construct a statement well or to engage with a victim specifically. But we don't see evidence in any way that we have lowered the standard. As the Deputy Mayor has just said, actually, in terms of English, we have a higher standard than the national requirement.
Okay, so you can assure us that there's nobody in the Met that has literacy issues that would interfere with their job?
I can assure you that the way we test them through recruitment and their training should identify if there are people who have literacy issues. Of course, because of things like disability, we do have to recognise that some people, for example, could have dyslexia or dyspraxia, and that might mean we need to train them in a different way. But I am confident that we have standards in the Met that test performance, not specifically connected to this questions, but I personally have questions about the speed of our Regulation 13 process for people who don't meet general standards, and actually whether we should be bolder and braver at making earlier decisions about whether we should be continuing to work with some people because of their behaviour, because of the way they behave towards victims or in the workplace, that we should be getting rid of quicker. But that isn't specific to this article. That's a much more general point.
Okay, going to that general point, are you actually putting that into place then? Are you actually, because that might help with other issues going forward?
Yes, so we are looking at our, it's one of the pieces of review work that we're currently doing, is looking at our Regulation 13 process. As you recall, the Commissioner has made a comment about the regulatory framework for the employment of police officers. It's one of the things that will feature in our feedback to the Home Office.
Well, and I hope they deal with that quickly, because I'm sure everybody supports you in that. Thank you. We're now moving to Assembly Member Garrett.
Morning, everyone. Morning, Dame Lynne. I need to add myself to the long list of people congratulating on you on your appointment. I had some questions about that sort of early part of the training process, but I just wanted to pick up on a comment earlier that you made about you effectively, I mean, my interpretation of what you said was that you're sort of auditing where the people are versus where you thought they were, and you're finding that, I assume there are the same number of people that you thought they were, but where they are is not where you expected. So you didn't say, and I'm just curious to understand, where are they then if they aren't where you thought they were? Opening cupboards and finding police officers. What's going on?
That's a very, very good question. I think people in the Met are fed up with me going, well, if they're not here, where are they? Which is at the heart of your question too. I think we've uncovered three broad buckets of things. So the first is we'd slipped into what I think is an unhealthy management practice of creating what we call pressure posts. So somebody like me decides that they want a little team to work with them on something for a period of time, and rather than having to make the difficult choice about where those people are going to come from, you set it up maybe for something that's meant to be 6 weeks, and then it becomes a year. And we did have, this has changed, but we did have over 1,000 people in these pressure posts. So interesting, where did these people come from? I think we have a subset of people that are restricted or suspended from duty because of misconduct investigations, some of whom will, the investigation will conclude they have no case to answer, they will come back and they will be brilliant officers, but for the period of the investigation they can't. And in other instances, actually, they need to appear before hearings, and those are currently taking longer, some of that being the responsibility of the Met than we would like them to, so improving the timeliness there. And then the third batch is a group of people that might have disabilities or might have been injured on duty, so for either a short period or maybe even a longer period, they aren't deployable in the roles that we want them to do. So we're doing two really significant pieces of work. The first is we need to be much clearer on what our establishments actually are. And then we've got HR setting what we are going to call a resilience margin. So Karen Graham, who's our Director of HR, joined us from the military, and she has shared some learning from there. So in every team, you will know how many people you could afford to have away from that particular team at any one time. We haven't had that. We haven't had that in the Met, which means you can sometimes have teams go under strength through no fault of their own, just those three things that I described to you converging together. So we'll try and set a resilience margin based on firm establishments. And then the second thing we're going to do is try and be much clearer about, well, if you are restricted for a period of time, what are the jobs that we think you can be deployable in? because at the moment that's managed at individual occulocation, and actually that's not fair on some individuals. You hear stories of people having to sort of hunt around the Met for the job they can do, and actually we should take some central ownership of that. So those are the three things that have come together to create the position I described, and we're addressing that through establishments and resilience and clarity on posts.
Okay. Yeah, just on that, I mean, I think a lot of people have had the same experience that I have, which is finding out that ward teams in particular, they seem to be, first up against the wall when there's a shortage of people. And it was a couple of years ago, actually, before I was in this role, speaking to my predecessor, because I had a conversation with a sergeant. There were 4 wards that he was responsible for, supposed to have 4 times 3 officers plus himself. And he said that he's literally got 3 actual warm bodies that he could deploy across all 4 wards. And, that started me looking at this. And what seems to happen, to sort of pick up what you just said, is that there are lists of names on a list. So in theory, that sergeant had 12 names, but most of them, for all sorts of reasons, they were abstracted. They were on restricted duty, someone was on maternity leave. So that individually, each one of those is reasonable, but the total effect was that there just weren't enough people. And so that's why my ears pricked up, because when you're suggesting that, my perception was that that's a ward issue, and then you're saying actually it's across the board, all across the Met, we're seeing a similar thing. So how do you tackle this difference between where there's a list of names and an actual, physical person who can turn up and do a thing?
So that is the best description of exactly what is happening all over the Met. We're going to talk about economic crime in a while, and actually if I were to talk to you about the numbers of people that are in our economic crime commands or our specialist crime commands, they would tell exactly the same story. So where we need to get to is a place where we say the establishment for this ward in London should be this. We accept that any one time you might have one person, I'm as you are working out, making this up because we haven't done the work yet, but
yep.
you might have one person who's either on maternity leave or currently restricted from duty. However, if that were to go to 2, that wouldn't be acceptable, and therefore the Met, at my level, should be taking a view on how we backfill. It's that hasn't happened to date.
Okay. And actually, sort of related to that in terms of shortage of posts, obviously you have new recruits coming in and then they eventually flow through into specialist roles later on. What is that process looking like? Because that's partly about filling in some of these holes, isn't it, in investigations or specialist units?
So part of the work that we need to do on resilience margins is at the moment, and this doesn't happen in this way in other organisations, probationers who are in training, even at the very start of their training, appear on BCU lists. So we haven't made the management board decision yet, so I'm not preempting my own decision. But I think it is likely that we will get to a place that when we set our resilience margins, we take the constables at the very first end of the service, not when they're deployable, but at the first end of their service out of that. So that's the first stage. As you then say, they then deploy onto a BCU, they become a competent officer and can then apply. What we are seeing at the moment is people applying and getting jobs in specialist posts, but then being blocked by moving from the BCUs because they've got the resilience gap. And my worry is that's at least in part going to our retention, because people are saying, I can't work, I don't have a career path that I can see that I'm able to follow here. So getting to a place where we know our own establishments, we know our own resilience margins, we are very clear on clear pathways, we have good appraisal systems, and we help people actively manage their own careers. I mean, I have a passion about how we spot talent and deal with underperformance. At the moment, there is a risk we deal with the Met as an amorphous. And it's not. It's an amazing organisation when it's at its best, made up of individuals who need to know what their path is, and we will all take different paths. And getting better at doing that is part of the solution to the issues that you've both raised. Yeah,
well, I'm pleased to hear that, and I'm sure we'll be looking forward to updates. But just back to specifically on training, and this large cohort of new people coming in, does the Met have the resources to manage that number of people coming in, both the training and then obviously the onboarding, let's call it, once they're moving into operational roles?
So I think this has been a challenge for us with the pop-up uplift. If you speak to our street duty teams, so the people that effectively first help officers deploy well on the streets of London at various times, the ratio between students and tutor has probably been higher than we would like. The thing I think I worry most about in that field, though, is our supervision ratios. And not only our ratios, but where our most experienced supervisors sit. At the moment, If you were to take across the Met ratio, you can take some comfort, because the ratio is about 1 to 6, which is what it would reasonably be. However, if you dive at the level beneath that, in some of our most inexperienced places, generally on BCUs, it's 1 to 12, and yet in our specialist functions, counter-terrorism, serious and organised crime, there can be 1 to 2, 1 to 3. So the Commissioner and I have tasked a bit of work to ask the question about what do we think the right supervisory levels should be, and to make sure, if there is pain to be borne in that, it doesn't get borne in the place where you've got most experience, both at constable and sergeant level. The opposite of that seems to be happening in some places at the moment. And of course, that means you've got very dedicated, hard-working but inexperienced officers being supported in volume by sergeants, and I think that does go to part of the standards issue and part of the talent spotting. If you've got a team of 12, it's pretty hard to be a very good sergeant just getting it, without an operational demand. So yes, an active and ongoing issue.
Okay, and the quote I've got here is that about the training needing to be, quote, grounded in the reality of everyday policing. How are you making sure that it's not a lot of book learning? I mean, there needs to be some, but that also it's, because it's obviously a very practical occupation being a police officer. So how are you making sure that new officers are getting that training?
So I said to you earlier, and you're going to get bored of me saying this, I'm sorry, but the great thing of being new is that you come in with fresh eyes. So I know what we looked like in 2011-12. I know what we looked like in 1989 when I joined, and I now come in now. And of course, the way we train and recruit our frontline officers is very different. So we have an outsourced contract through an organisation and then into 4 universities. We need to be better at hearing our frontline officers when they tell us how they experience the training and how it sets them up. I think there's a bit of a tendency to say, well, this is what it is, and on paper it looks very good, but we need to hear their real word reality. The Commissioner visited one of the training establishments, in fact, with Andy Marsh from the College of Policing a couple of weeks ago, and took frontline feedback from I think it was 17 direct entry detectives, and I think that's raised some questions in his mind, and therefore our minds, about actually whether all of the training is as grounded in reality as you've rightly said it needs to be. I held some focus groups with some of our officers in Islington, and for example, they were talking about, they were taught the law in terms of stop search, they were taught they had good information on community impact, but actually the physical going hands-on and how to actually search someone in a way that they felt respected, they didn't feel it had been as good as it needs to be. And I had a team of detectives talk to me about actually the fact they didn't feel they'd really had enough training in statement taking, and that's a core policing skill that needs to be better. So as a result of that, we are currently reviewing our approach to training, and we clearly need to be much more hands-on in managing the outsourced contracts to make sure that it is meeting the needs of our frontline officers.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the sort of university involvement, and one of the things I've heard is that it's so I think it was put to me that you feel more like a student, you know, on a college course, rather than a newly recruited police officer. So it's not a uniformed environment. You don't feel, here I am, I've joined this big organisation, I'm wearing my new uniform, I'm involved in this, you know, exciting new phase of my life. You sort of just feel like, you know, a student wearing tracksuit trousers and a t-shirt going to sitting in a lecture about some stuff. And that has 2 problems. One is it's the sort of mindset of you're now part of this organisation. But secondly, picking up on the thing you said earlier about weeding out inappropriate people, that becomes harder if it's in that sort of not within a police environment. So is that something that you're I mean, you mentioned that the Commissioner's picked it up, but what can be done about it? Are you stuck with these contracts?
So I'll start where you started and end with where you finished. Okay. So I have to watch that I'm just not a dinosaur, but I deeply believe that when you are joining the profession that is policing, how you look, how you carry the uniform, how you behave, how you clean your kit, what the values actually mean in practice, what the oath actually means. If you don't embed that at the very beginning of somebody's career, the chance of you being able to follow that through, which is which is why the Commissioner and I have very much focused on it, because I do think, for both the reasons you say, it goes to the heart of standards, the standards and expectation. We'll wait and see what the review that we've tasked says, but I think there are things that we can do within our current contract to be more hands-on. There are questions for me about what we ask people to wear, how the courses are branded, how they feel like Metropolitan Police officers for the whole time they're deployed. They aren't students who can behave like students, and what that leads to in respect of a future model is important to us, because effectively we're just recruiting all these new people. They need to start from the right place, and that means you set standards, you set expectation from the beginning. This was started by the previous Deputy Commissioner, so Sir Steve used to address all the probationer courses. That's something that I have carried on, and on the rare occasion I can't do it, an Assistant Commissioner does it. This thing about saying you're joining this amazing thing, we police with consent, and this is why all these things matters, and give the opportunity for questions and answers. I felt when I went to Hendon, it felt very different to the Hendon I went to, and not necessarily in a good way. That isn't to say the Hendons of the past were perfect. Life moves on, training moves on, but actually it needs to feel like a branded policing environment where standards matter.
Okay, that's very positive, but therefore to inject some negativity, obviously there's the police uplift programme that's ongoing, we're coming to the end of. So is there a danger of, stable doors being closed after horses have bolted? Thousands of officers have gone through this programme, which for reasons we've just talked about isn't perfect. And then the fix comes in just as the recruitment numbers fade away. Now, how quickly can we see those changes, I suppose, is my question.
Yeah, so I don't want to, I won't want to give you some hint I've got my head in the sand, because I really haven't. I don't think it's that the quality of the constables that we are turning out now is poor, but I think we've expected too much to be picked up by street duties and frontline supervisors, when actually those are things that should have been embedded from the minute of training. So in the stop search example I gave you, I said to this very impressive young constable, so like, how did you know you didn't know to do it, and did you learn? Because inside I was thinking, oh, did that happen on the street? And he said, oh, we were really lucky here, our street duties were brilliant, they set us an exercise to do in the back of the yard, and it was when I deployed in the back of the yard that they told me I was doing it wrong. So I think those gaps have been picked up by other professional people that work for us, but that isn't meant to be how it happens. But it does go to the point about why 5 days of leadership training is important, and why we need to use the Regulation 13 process effectively. This balance between academic essay writing and referencing compared to statement taking and searching capability, we need to get those things in the right balance.
Yeah, just it's more of an observation than a question, so I'm basically done. But particularly that point about stop and search, I know there's been some really good work done in South BCU, which is my area, at the Warren, in terms of bringing young lads in from the community, so they do role-playing with police officers about what it's like to be stopped and searched. That seems to have made a really tangible difference in my area to the way that they're done, and the sort of doing the job but without having so much conflict and confrontation in what is naturally a potentially high conflict situation. So it does worry me a bit to hear that not only is the rest of London not necessarily doing that, but maybe isn't even doing some practical stuff. So I look forward to hearing that's improving. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you. Can I have my congratulations to you, Dame Lynne? I think you've touched on it already, but just to round it off, what progress is the Met making in developing a training package for sergeants? You referred earlier to sergeants. You do a specific training package for them?
Yes, so so effectively what we've done is we've taken the College of Policing's new package. So the College of Policing had developed a package based on direct feedback from sergeants. We're taking that in its entirety, because that's been properly evaluated and assessed, and then we're overlaying it with. So we're not changing it. One thing the Met's been accused of in history is not we're big, we're different. Actually, in terms of products that mean we can get high quality people, we should learn from elsewhere in the country. So we're taking that, and then we are overlaying it with what London's communities need, because London's communities to a degree are different. But if any of the committee would like to see where we've got to in the development. Very happy to share it. And of course, when the programmes start, we definitely will want to sort of observe a programme without impacting on the training, so people can't feel they be themselves. But you'd all be very welcome to attend.
Very kind. I'm sure we'll look at that. Thank you. Also, we've got the 2.5 million identified in the Mayor's budget to be used to improve training and resilience in the Met's Command and Control Centre. How's that moving along?
So, in a number of ways, if you look at our direct performance, so the numbers, not the quality, which is the question that was raised. The question that was raised earlier. You know, we aren't yet achieving our 999 performance, our 101 performance, either in call handling or attendance in the way that we would like to. Some of that is as a result of we just haven't had enough. We haven't had enough people. We haven't had enough bums on seats to make the performance as good as it should be. And some of it is about the quality of training. So one of the things the HMIC FRS pick up for us is there's something called this Thrive assessment, which is I can never remember what all the initials mean, but a threat, risk and harm assessment that should be done at different stages of the process. We're doing a good job of capturing whether we were doing it or not. So you've had one call, has it had a Thrive assessment? What we're now doing is putting in place a quality assurance team that go on and say, well, they did it, but was it a good enough quality? In terms of the numbers recruitment, I can tell you where we are. That's not on that one. Bear with me. I can never remember the numbers off by heart. I've definitely got them, but I'll write to you with them.
Also, you mentioned earlier about the reduction from the other end, i.e. the loss of people at the top end. And I wonder, are you doing anything to try and retard that loss of people leaving?
So I've now got the numbers for your last question. I'm going to save myself a letter. It was actually directly in front of me.
I'm sure it's more important thing to do.
but I didn't see it. So by the end of March, we will have recruited 276 of the new first contact operators. It would reduce our staff vacancy rate from 6% to 1%. So 1% is a reasonable vacancy rate, but 6% really wasn't. CCC is a mixture of officers and staff, and we had a 10% vacancy rate for officers. We will be compulsory transferring 35 officers into Met CC in time for our peak summer call volume, so we're trying to get ahead of problems that we've seen before. And for the 23-24 recruitment plan, we have 744 candidates currently in the recruitment pipeline, which feed intakes up until November. And we receive about 340 staff applications a month, which is great. There are other bits of the programme, how we attract and retain. I'll come to retention in a minute. There's something about terms and conditions, something about shift patterns, something about flexible working, and definitely something about paid progression for police staff that we need to look at. And alongside the Leadership Academy, we are looking at a Met CC training academy to ensure that the point that was just made about have we got enough people to recruit, to train enough officers. If we're bringing in this many call handlers, it's a different sort of training. Have we got enough capacity to get them up to speed? One of the issues that we've had in history is how we assess them as pass or fail. So our 10 first contact operator courses are planned for next year, which is an increased capacity from 275 this year to 310 next year. So I'm confident in terms of the plan. If it happens like it's currently profiled to happen, then we should start to see the very necessary improvements in performance. On what are we doing about retention, both for officers and staff, we need to make much more active use of exit interview data and genuinely understanding why people are going. We've got quite a high level analysis at the moment, but when I've read it, it doesn't really help me. If somebody says, if they answer, I'm going for a different development opportunity. Until you understand the detail of that development opportunity, you don't know whether it's something we could have provided or not. So again, we have a bit of work happening on that.
Because there are a number of members of the Met who are leaving to join other forces, so we need to understand what's attractive about that, I would think.
So as somebody who served in 3 police forces in a national law enforcement body, there is definite benefit in having a more movable workforce. I spoke earlier about a reformed pay model. I think this model, where every force recruits in competition with one another, and the same for national bodies and the same for counter-terrorism policing, I personally think, how attractive would it be if you could spend some of your career policing London's most diverse communities, some of your career taking on the most serious and organised criminals in the National Crime Agency, some of your career working in counter-terrorism, but then you go back to the local community and you might lead a team. I just think that would be a much more exciting career than what we offer to people. And actually, what we do see with some officers who are leaving the Met is they join the Met originally, sometimes when they're younger. They then end up in a relationship, they end up with a family, and for caring responsibilities, which are very expensive in London, they might move to where their parents' home base is, so they've got some childcare. Well, actually, if you could do that as part of a plan, and I was speaking to one of our officers, I was trying to work out whether I'm disclosing personal data, I don't think I am. I was talking to one of our officers the other day who, she's a really impressive officer. During the funeral, I had a report of some amazing work that she'd done outside Buckingham Palace, engaging with the crowds there. So I'd been to meet her to say thank you. So she emailed me to say she was leaving, and I'd had a coffee with her. So I was really sad to hear that. And the story of why she was leaving says a lot about, actually, we just need to be more flexible for this modern workforce. So in her instance, she's met a partner who is based in a different part of the country. She wants to have a go at something that's currently a hobby that actually she quite fancies giving a go as a bit of a career. So ideally, she'd like to take a career break, but that doesn't meet any of our conditions for a career break. And I just think that's quite an old-fashioned way of managing workforce. So we've got to get better at recognising how we create career routes that meet the needs of the modern population, particularly in a world where the workforce is such a buoyant market.
You made a very good point, actually, about where officers should do certain aspects that really is pretty much limited just for what the Met can do. Have we sort of approached any other forces to sort of offer a, 10-week, 6-month experience for their officers who probably wouldn't get to do the kind of things that Met officers do?
So we haven't done yet, but I absolutely want to open that door for exactly the reasons that you say. So many officers during the tragedy at the Her Majesty of the Queen's funeral, when St Mark and I were walking the streets, were talking about, I can't move my whole family down here, but I'd love to come and police London for a couple of years or 3 years. At the moment, that looks like a loss to the home force. So that's why I would love for it to be seen as a national workforce, the policing national workforce, where you can spend some of your time in a big city, whether it be London or whether it be Birmingham or Manchester, some of your time in a rural area, and we need to stop seeing this as a competition, because actually that's not how our officers and staff see it. Many of them are absolutely passionate about policing London, but for personal reasons it works for them at different times in their lives, and at the moment we just lose them. There is something to be said for, so I think we are definitely losing people on promotion at the moment. The earlier point I made about how good we are at appraising our people and making them feel valued, and knowing that you might be a brilliant neighbourhood officer or a response officer, and the one thing that would make you feel really valued in the Met is for us to give you a driving course. But we don't, and we don't tell you when it's going to happen. Or you're somebody who's really talented and we think you're the future commissioner, but we don't tell you that, and we don't put you on a plan, and we sort of rely on you. And actually, frankly, if you're a white man, you're probably better at negotiating your way there. If you're a black female, you're much less likely to do it. So we need to get much better at proactively spotting our talented people through an appraisal process. And whilst our So I'm getting a bit passionate about this now. I really sincerely believe this is a future model of employment for the Met. Or if you are going for promotion, we put you through a lengthy application form, a very complicated process where actually being able to provide evidence can often feel like ticking boxes rather than something that is really judging your worth as a sergeant. So how do we find a way through that and allows us to say to cadres of people, this is what the Met thinks of you. We think you're really good, or we think you're underperforming. And at the moment, we find it hard to have those conversations.
One final question. Over the last maybe 9-8 years, we've seen, certainly in the early part of that period, a massive reduction in the number of civil staff, and their positions were backfilled by police officers. Surely, if we were to look at recruiting them, and I'm sure they would be less of a cost than a fully warranted officer, has the Met thought about bringing in more civil staff to release those officers who are doing many clerical jobs now, actually, to put them on the front line or more interesting work?
So as we develop the plans for the Met, we have to have that conversation about the balance of the workforce mix, because we all value the role of uniformed and plainclothes police officers, whether they be in communities or doing very specialist jobs. But if I give you an example, and I say this based on my experience in the National Crime Agency, some of the people that we might want to do financial investigation or cyber investigation would feel much less comfortable starting their career as a uniformed officer on the streets of London, and actually finding a route to employ the right mix of officers and staff. And as you say, and I think this resilience work will help us answer this question, I think we currently have police officers doing roles that would be better done by better qualified police staff, but they've ended up in those posts either because they're not deployable or actually because we've just needed somebody doing it. And taking a step back and developing a proper workforce plan for London that has the right mix of officers, staff, volunteers and specials is absolutely where we need to be.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, we're running well over time. There's 3 more Assembly members on this. Can we keep it as brief as possible? Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you. I wanted to pick up this issue about your workforce, and you've picked up the point I wanted to ask you about exit interviews. But you said earlier, about work-life balance. You talked about changing duties last minute and so on. If you're a woman who is often the primary carer, how on earth could you work when you don't know when your shift's going to end, when your shifts are being changed? Are you looking at fundamental things around things like annualised hours, so somebody could work term time only? They work specifically part-time, clear hours, so they know when their shift is going to end, so they are able to continue in the force or join the police and are able to, contribute in that way. And what are you particularly doing then to attract more women into the Met, but also others, whether it's from the LGBT community, black and minority ethnic communities in London?
So on the first point, I can't answer you specifically on annualised hours. I don't know what we're doing on that point. The challenge for policing, and you and I were last at this committee in 2011 when we had the tragedy of the riots. But there are occasions when we need to be able to press the button and know that people are going to turn out, and that will always be the case for the Met. But at the heart of your question is this point. At the moment, we ask people to effectively self-negotiate their flexible working patterns. And of course, flexible working patterns will often be unique to the individual. What we don't have is a London-based view of actually what that means, and that has been part of our problem in CCC. We've negotiated so many flexible patterns that have met the needs of the individual, but we haven't taken the step back and said, what does this actually mean to London's communities? So the work that we were doing, we're calling it resilience margins because that's the word that the military use, but just to understand where we have flexibility and where we don't matters. I don't think it is acceptable in this day and age to say we can just muck you about whenever we fancy mucking you about. I don't think it's that simple, and I think I don't think people would tolerate that in the future. In extremis, I think of course people would understand you have the coronation coming up, they will understand if there is a murder on their BCU. But I think what it feels like to some of our frontline people at the moment is they get mucked about because our planning's just not very good. And that isn't acceptable, and it does impact on people with caring and other responsibilities in the way you describe.
But you're still talking about it as about your systems, and as long as people know your systems are right. But actually, if you are a female police officer, you have a child, you maybe have 2 children, you come back, the logistics of it all, and suddenly you can't guarantee I need to finish at 5 because I've got to get to the nursery at 6. That there's no negotiation there. But how can you ensure that the force is representative of London's communities if you can't sort of guarantee that for some officers?
I might not be explaining myself very well. So I think if you are somebody that has a flexible working pattern, that means you on 1 or 2 days a week, that's your complete cut-off because you have no other abilities, no other caring abilities, no other people that can stand in for you. I think we would have to get to the point where we said, in that case, you're one of the officers that fits within the resilience margin, and there would be, it couldn't be everybody because we couldn't police London. So the sad thing at the moment is I can't tell you how many people that applies to. I can't sit here today and say how many people we've got on flexible working patterns or how good we are at.
But you're looking to
Yes.
design a new system that would enable these officers to thrive in the Met Police and still be able to contribute within what their work-life balance.
So we're not at that stage yet. The first stage is knowing where our people are, knowing what they're doing, and knowing what flexibility we've got in the organisation to enable that. But my starting point is exactly what you say, which is we have to be an organisation that serves the public at their time of need, but does provide good careers for people who've got all sorts of different backgrounds and all sorts of responsibilities, because there are brilliant people in the workplace who, for a moment in time in their lives and in their careers, might be more restricted than at other times.
And then what are you doing about recruiting more women, black and minority ethnic communities, LGBT+?
So our recruitment levels for women are relatively good, and they are very, very slowly improving. For black, Asian, minority ethnic heritage people, it's harder for us currently to answer the question on LGBTQ+ people. Our data is not as good in that area, and that is one of the things that we do desperately need to improve. There is a programme of work at the moment, which I've had a presentation on. I went to the external reference group, which is looking at outreach in communities, particularly into black communities. We get really good feedback from the programme. We've yet to see the numbers come through in the volume that we would hope. So there are some different things we're trying. I can't sit here today and yet say to you there is a connectivity between our numbers and those programmes, and that's where we need to get to.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Moema.
Thank you. My question is to both the Deputy Mayor and the Deputy Commissioner. So the Mayor's action plan mentioned that the MPS were going to be looking at reporting on the progress being made, not just through the main body of the police, but in the upper ranks in terms of diversity. And part of that is obviously around trust and confidence, but part of that is for the Met to practice what they preach in terms of making sure that London is reflected at all levels of the organisation. And I can't remember whether it was Steve House or Dame Cressida Dick that had said that you said it was very, very slow in terms of progress for black and minority ethnic Londoners. Where that is in the upper ranks, it felt, to be a little bit dramatic. It felt like people it was like a one-in, one-out system. And it would take, I remember the number 25 years, but it would take decades to have any level of parity at those upper ranks. So what proactive work is happening there? I'd be really interested to hear.
So I haven't brought the specific numbers with me. We can bring that forward. The figures you quote are correct. If we carry on doing what we've always done, we're not going to make the progress we need to at the speed we need to. So we are seeing progress at entry level. We are seeing slight progress at junior levels of promotion, more for men than for women, and more for Asian people than for black people. So women of colour find it slower to move through the organisation than they currently should, which is why the work that I described earlier about actually how do you spot and nurture talent and how do people know we value them as people and how are you reaching down and putting them through really needs to matter. And this point about culture being set from the top, this is just a practical example, but I don't think there is a golden bullet for this, because if there was a golden bullet, I think we'd have done it now. So I think it's a load of, externally it's about outreach, internally it's about training sergeants differently so they have the confidence to do what I've just described. But there are some levers we can pull internally. So I chaired, I've asked Karen Graham, our Director of HR, to produce for me what our talent pipeline is so that I can see it and I can ask questions about it. That wasn't a pre-existing thing. We had our first meeting of it this week. She gave me the data based on people that are on fast-track programs. But of course, those are people who have self-applied and been selected, and that's quite different to leaders actually reaching down into the organisation and tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, look, you're doing a brilliant job. Like, we want to nurture you, we want to give you a coach, we want to give you a mentor, we want to pull you on through. So it's a nudge thing. So asking those questions, we have the risk of answering this question is you sort of name an impressive black person that you've appointed to a job, and we've done some of that, but it isn't. It can't only be that on its own. It has to be something more systematic.
I agree with you. I don't think it's right that you should kind of dip into a pool of people and basically pick a winner out because everyone else is a loser. But it does need more than just nudging people to take those steps. We had, I can't remember where it was that we went to visit, but it was bewildering to me, the visit that we did as a committee in the first year, that was a normal work environment. There were no black people in that building. There was one Asian man. And I thought, how do people that work here think that this is normal or acceptable, irrespective of whatever good work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis? And I just think that if the reporting that's supposed to be outlined in the action plan is to be meaningful, then I think we probably do need something a bit more robust and proactive than nudging people to do things. I can say from personal experience it's not a nice thing to be the only person of your type in a room. However, it is something which does require people around you to consider making a bit more of an effort for the benefit of improving the organisation, and I just would want to see more of that at all levels.
So just to pick up on my phraseology, I'm not suggesting this is a subtle thing. I think it needs to be pretty unsubtle in making explicit that we expect talented people, regardless of their background, to be spotted and nurtured and coached and brought through. Only this week or last week, I met. So there's a self-help group, a self-start group of women, of black women in the Met, black officers in the Met. They've set themselves up without any support from the Met because they wanted help at how to navigate the processes of London. Your point, two of them were very experienced in service, one mid-service, one junior, one 4 years in, and she spoke about, with great passion, about what she'd experienced and how lonely it can feel and why this group had been important to her. Their challenge to me at the end of the meeting was a brilliant challenge, which was you give funding and support to the Black Police Association, the Police Federation, I can't remember who else they listed, but they listed all, but how do we access that? We don't even know how to access it. So we have a piece of work going on at the moment by a new commander, Colin Wingrove, who's come in having been the BCU commander. I keep forgetting the names of our new BCUs. Area South, the one that covers Lambeth, and so he has a piece of work, and one of the pieces of work is to look at external engagement. The other piece of work, including our race action plan and making sure we have a London race action plan. But the other thing he's looking at is how we use our staff association. Where's the parity in what we ask them to do and what gets paid for? And actually, if that group particularly needs funding for an event, where do they get it from when others know where they need to go? So it's going to be a whole series of things.
Can I just, thanks, Sam. In the Mayor's Act, just to pick up on what was in the Mayor's Action Plan, absolutely there needs to be much better diversity at the senior ranks of the Met. But actually, in terms of the work we did through the Mayor's Action Plan with the Met, we understood actually that the root of the problem was people moving from PC to sergeant to inspector, because once you got the flow, you actually, with the pool of individuals, you could actually, the numbers that were going into the senior ranks was just about right for that pool of individuals, so you needed to make the pool bigger. So the Mayor did invest in a career development service, which is it's 1.2 million pounds of it. We haven't yet got the, it's still being looked at and developed, and we will be absolutely monitoring how successful it is. That career development service, it's the sort of thing that the Deputy Commissioner is talking about, and you're talking about a structured approach to ensuring that black and minority ethnic officers move from the PC to the sergeant to the inspector, so therefore can go further up the ranks, because that's where the specific problems really were, because you weren't getting that flow of individuals. And on the action plan targets, we didn't set targets for the senior ranks, and what we set targets for was, with the Met, was around the actual number and percentage of black and minority ethnic officers. Target for 2022 was it's not a huge target. It's 16%. That target was met, and it's 21% by 2024. That's going to be challenging. It really is going to be challenging, because, as the Deputy Commissioner says, although there is progress, it is slow, and that is going to be really challenging to get that 21% of officers in the Met to be black or minority ethnic by 2024.
Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Ahmed, can you be as brief as possible? We're very, very late now.
Is it working? Thank you. Oh, and that one really is working. Thank you, Chair. My apologies to the committee for my delay in getting here this morning. Deputy Commissioner, I think it's Central South, the VCU that you're looking for, and Commander Wingrove is certainly your gain and our loss there. Deputy Commissioner, you just picking up on something that you spoke about, the experience of the officer that you're talking about, that you're about to lose. Can you just explain exactly, if that officer in future wanted to come back into the Met, what would have to happen? Would she have to start it all over again?
So she wouldn't have to start all over again, depending on how long she'd been out for. I need to check that this hasn't changed since I last served, because I haven't checked it before I've come here today, but it used to be, if you came back within 5 years, you just had to do a sort of conversion course. We can check whether that's still the same. But then you have to go through vetting, you have to go through the full application. So, and of course, if you're on a career break, we keep in touch with you, you still feel part of the organisation. So I'm personally persuaded that is the right way to go, just to be much more flexible in the way we use our approach to the career break and other structures we can have. Of course, the one thing we must always do is, particularly in the current context, is vetting and standards checks when people come back. But at the moment, that's what it would take. I have encouraged her to. I mean, the other thing that I think, if you're going to my point about how we think about the workforce differently, the National Crime Agency has a branch in the place she's moving to. You know, if we could have worked with them to second her from us into them to that place for a period of time, she may well then have either had a good career with them or come back to us at a different time in her life. And it's this ability just to think a bit more differently.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Given the time, colleagues, and that's a very interesting section we've just done, we're going to take out the section 3, which is the independent review of Prevent, which was the Shawcross report, because quite frankly, I think that really does need a specific... Well, it could well be. So we're going to take that out. We're going straight to section 4, colleagues, which is safer schools officers, and those questions are going to be led by Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair, and can I add to my congratulations to Dame Lynne. So, questions on safer schools. First of all, Deputy Commissioner, The Safer Schools protocol, which I understand has been shared with schools actually quite recently, what's actually included in the Met Safer Schools protocol, and how is it used by the Met and the Met's partners?
I wonder if, before I answer the direct question, recognising we're pushed for time, but I just, one of the things I reflect coming back here is actually how disconnected different bits of our current policing system are into communities. So as we develop proposals for the strongest ever neighbourhood policing, I am quite keen to be able to present back to this panel, having been through MOPAC first, of course, how we see local neighbourhood policing teams, safer schools officers and teams, and town centre teams working together as co-joined teams that serve communities. At the moment, they feel quite disjointed. So I just wanted to say that at the outset, because what I'm going to describe to you is what currently happens now, but I think there is an interesting question about the dynamic between all those things. At the moment, they feel too separate.
That's encouraging to hear that you're thinking about how that role works, because there is also, I think people have said to me that they feel that police and schools are sort of being used almost to pick up disciplinary matters in schools, rather than kind of taking that broader approach to looking at what's happening within the community and potentially signposting people to other groups and organisations around the Met, rather than and obviously there's a lot of concern about police in schools actually getting some young people kind of connected into the criminal justice system potentially, rather than having the kind of outcomes that hopefully you might see for how the police relate to schools. But sorry, go back to the question.
Yes, sorry. So on the actual protocol, so I'm told we review the protocol and handbook every 1 to 2 years. In June 2022, so last year, the documents were updated with amendments to include vetting requirements, but specifically replacing what is called child and vulnerable group supervision with enhanced DBS checking. The searching guidance, and you'll all understand why that matters, in accordance with the Child Q findings, and that includes consulting parents and or other carers. Criteria for school prioritisation to allow safer schools teams to focus resources in line with the police and crime plan, and how safer schools teams use our forensic management system. So that's how it was updated. It was also updated to include what the good attributes of a safer schools officer would be, and a section on engagement with parents and carers. That was specifically updated. We had a public event in January 2022 where parents and carers told us what they thought was missing. So we took on board their feedback and then included it in the handbook. Your point about what's the role of an officer in a school? How do they work with the local safer neighbourhood team for where the young person might live? How do they work with the safer neighbourhood team on what might be violence or bullying behaviour at the school gate, outside the schools? I think there is a better opportunity for join up there, and being explicit with schools that we are not there to deal with their disciplinary issues, because if we step into that space, there is a very real risk we criminalise children that we wouldn't have encountered on the streets in that way.
Thank you. Can I move to the Deputy Mayor? The June 22 update to the Mayor's action plan had said that a final report on safe schools officers was had been due to be published in autumn 21, but as far as I've seen, I don't think it's yet been published, and I just wonder if you've now received that final report, and if so, what the key recommendations are and how those might be taken forward.
So we're still in conversation with the Met about the report and discussions about it. We have discussed it at the Disproportionality Board that I chair alongside Debbie Weeks-Bernard, Deputy Mayor for Communities. And in terms of the report itself, it recommends improved, as you would expect, and there's a problem across the Met, has already been alluded to by the Deputy Commissioner. The report itself recommends improved collection of ethnicity data. It recommended establishing a Safer Schools Officer Partnership Panel, which we are looking into doing alongside the Metropolitan Police, and also, as already talked about, an actual Safer Schools Officers Performance Framework, which should also focus on diversion and intervention activities. So those are the sort of three key areas about the recommendations in the report. Publication of the report will follow. We're just in conversations with the Met about that.
So when you say it'll follow, should we be expecting that in the next few months, or are we talking like 2 months?
I don't know is the answer
6
to that.
months.
I'll be perfectly honest with you. I don't know what the issue is about why we haven't yet published it. So I'd have to. So I think we should publish it as soon as we can, basically.
Okay, thank you. So then, sorry, next piece that I needed. So then the Runnymede Trust recommended in January this year that Safer Schools partnerships and Safer Schools officers should actually be withdrawn from schools, as they say their presence disproportionately impacts black and minority ethnic communities and fails to support a safer school environment. So I'd like actually all three of you to say whether you agree with the Runnymede Trust on that assessment, and yes, if not, why not? So Diana.
Yes, I mean, I think that our surveys generally have a high level of support for SSOs, something like 93% of Londoners overall. Young people who were aware of their Safer Schools officer, 41% believe the officer made them feel more safe at school, while only 3% felt they made them less safe. And I know that when we have done public review meetings in the context of the Mayor's Action Plan in relation to this, there is generally a good deal of support for the principle of SSOs where it works well, and in fact some appetite to extend the model from secondary schools into primary schools, although clearly there is understandably a capacity issue there. But I think it's largely about the quality of the experience and the quality of the individual SSO that is probably driving attitudes. But generally, our findings are that they are regarded as a positive.
Thank you. Sophie.
I would completely agree with Diana in terms of what she said. I think there is an issue, isn't there, that the Runnymede Trust is actually really looking at, and it's an issue that we have to do more work on to give assurance about, which is, do police officers in schools provide a positive experience for young people? And the whole thrust of it has always been that actually it does develop a good relationship with young people, and it's much better for a young person in London to have their first experience of a police officer in a school, in a in school which is not a confrontational confrontational experience, such as on the street through stop and search. That is what lies behind having officers in schools. What we've got to do in terms of assuring organisations like the Runnymede Trust, but also the parents and young people that we have spoken to through the development of the Mayor's Action Plan, because actually one of the recommendations of the Mayor's Action Plan is that we need to assess and monitor and understand better what the impact of Safer Schools officers was. We've got to do that assurance to show that, one, it doesn't criminalise young black boys or girls more, criminalise them. Two, that they're not there as a sort of a security presence. They really are there in relation to developing relationships, providing those courses that we talked about earlier in terms of stop and search, which was it's so actually police officers really understanding and talking to young people about what their experiences of policing. We've got a job to do to assure some parents, not all parents, we've got a job to do to assure some young people, but not all young people, because we can see from our surveys, as Diana said, that actually a lot of young people feel that the Safer Schools officer makes them feel safe and that they do want them in the schools. We've got to make sure that that is, there is that assurance and transparency and accountability around that.
There's got to be that assurance that for all young people that they don't feel discriminated against, and that also that given that we had the situation of Child Q in Hackney, which Assemblyman Moema is the assembly member for that constituency, and has been very close to what happened in that case. But that was the most degrading experience that a young person can have, that happened in a school, and it is. So the need for all of the reassurance piece is absolutely critical. So I was very glad to hear Dame Lynne talk about that piece in the earlier answer. But Dame Lynne, did you want to come in on this question?
So I won't echo what Sophie and Diana have said, other than to say the Met has been working in schools for over 20 years. We've got 325 Safer Schools officers, and I think you hit the nail on the head when this is about quality work, and we shouldn't judge all through the lens of one incident, albeit we absolutely recognise the significance of that incident. And just to give a couple of examples, because I think it is important in this debate to highlight where it does go well. So Selina Wade, who is one of our Safer Schools officers, was working through the period of COVID with schools, and she worked with the local authorities to make sure 186 individual children who were vulnerable were visited and spoken to. One visit led to the discovery of a 15-year-old child who'd been trafficked to Eastern Europe to be married. So just a very tangible safeguarding example. And similarly, Maria Evershed, she set up a netball club, and you might say, well, what's that to do with being a police officer? But it meant she grew a very different relationship with young women and girls, and one of them disclosed to her some background to why she kept going missing, and without going into the detail of that, but it allowed a safeguarding and care intervention to be put in place. So there are some tangibly good examples of officers doing outstanding things in schools, but we've just got to make sure that quality is consistent.
Thank you. Now I just want to pick up on the strip search issue a bit more. The Commissioner told me back in October that strip search is a critical power, and when we're trusted with a sensitive power like that, we need to use it as carefully and responsibly as possible, and clearly we were not. That's why it's been clamped down on, and I'm pleased by the much more focused use of it. Now, do you, and this is again is a question both for the Deputy Mayor and for Deputy Commissioner, do you think that the use of the power of strip search is being used carefully and responsibly currently? Are you confident that that you've got the provisions in place that the situation that happened for Child Q couldn't happen again?
So I completely concur with what the Commissioner said to you last time he reported. We, as you would expect, are receiving regular updates and work that has been done by DAC Lawrence Taylor on this, which gives us the numbers, the background, the quality, and we likewise then report that into MOPAC. The Deputy Mayor has it as a specific item on an agenda of a meeting we recently met and gave a detailed update. Of course, MOPAC can answer for themselves, but yeah, we are continue to look closely at this issue, and we will make sure we maintain that.
I mean, the most recent data that we've got shows that in October 22, there were 74 young people were strip searched, not in schools, but 74 young people had been strip searched that month. It's still an awful lot of strip searching. It's a very intimate and can be a very degrading experience.
I don't want to dance on the head of a pin, because that's a really irritating thing for a senior police officer to do, but there is a difference between a strip search and an intimate search. But I do know the point you are making, which if I had another human being strip searching me, it would feel immensely intrusive. Unfortunately, there is a spectrum of young people, 17-year-olds, I'm afraid, still do secrete drugs, which harms themselves and others, and secrete weapons. We are very closely monitoring the outcome of the strip searches to assure ourselves they're being used appropriately. Until we turn the behaviour of a very, 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 very small proportion of London's young people away from crime, away from the need to feel that they have to protect themselves. For all the reasons the Commissioner has said, in very rare circumstances, it is a critical tool. The last thing we would want would be people who are detained in custody able to self-harm because actually they are then in crisis because they're in a place they weren't expecting to be and they have something on their person which enables them to harm themselves. And but it's a hard balance, and I don't seek to say anyone in policing takes any pleasure from it.
Yeah, we are talking about children, and we've also been talking this morning about safeguarding, and the safeguarding of those children could also be carried out by, if there is someone that you are very concerned may have an item about their person that they could harm themselves with, that they could be being watched and monitored if they are being held by the police. And I mean, the Runnymede Trust, again in their report, were worried about strip searching of children being used disproportionately, and they felt that disproportionately against black and minority ethnic children, and that the rights of the child to be safeguarded and their right to privacy was not being upheld. And on those grounds, they felt that the government should actually end the power of the police to strip search children. Now, can you just respond to that? And also, I'd like Sophie to respond to it as well.
So the powers that policing use are not decided by policing, and that is right. They are decided by elected politicians. So I won't comment on whether it's the right power for us to have, because that is genuinely for other people to decide. What I will say is that we use the power very carefully. We've learnt from incidents where we didn't use it as carefully as we should do. But our safeguarding responsibility requires us to ensure that people, young people, do not have things on their on their possession that can harm them or other people. And for that reason, in accordance with the current law, I think it is the right and proportionate use of power in those extreme circumstances.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor.
Just on the figures, in relation to the more intimate searches, I haven't actually got the figures give me the actual figures, but we have had a 64% reduction on the number of those searches when they were compared to last year. And you're right about it's 74 for strip searches, which are two different types, as Deputy Commissioner has talked about. It's really difficult, isn't it, because it is such an intrusion of privacy, and of course children should be safeguarded. However, I do think at the moment, unless there's going to be a change in the law, that power should be there, but only used in exceptional circumstances, really exceptional circumstances. And I've written to the College of Policing to ask that the authorised professional practice is looked at again on this to make it much clearer to police officers what those exceptional circumstances should be. And as the ethics panel has reported in its interim report, there needs to be a really serious discussion about, is the possession of cannabis an exceptional circumstance? In my view, I very much doubt it. But we do know that from some of the things that are found on young people, that actually those strip searches can safeguard them because they're finding objects that they can harm themselves with. And that's, for me, the exceptional circumstances when the vulnerability there is absolute risk to that young person. So it is a really difficult area, but I do actually think at the moment that power, if only used in exceptional circumstances in order to safeguard the child, used appropriately, and also with an appropriate adult, because the Runnymede Trust also talks about the appropriate adult. That's absolutely crucial. And that was one of a significant, and there were a significant number of problems in the Child Q case, and that was one of the problems, wasn't it, that there was not an appropriate adult present. And that's got to be, there should never be a strip search or any type of search like that without an appropriate adult.
If you talk to any young person who has experienced strip search by the police, they feel absolutely degraded, and it is a completely devastating experience. Diana, did you want to come in?
Well, I just wanted to add that, I mean, I think we all agree with what you're saying. I mean, that's why rigorous and consistent monitoring is also really, really important. And the Met has made progress since the ghastly child Q case, in the sense of the transparency of publishing more data about this, which is something that MOPAC has been pressing for. So we welcome that. But also I just wanted to touch on the report that you mentioned earlier, that you were asking about when you would receive it, and Sophie mentioned that it had been discussed at the Disproportionality Board. Because that included a proposal for the development of a partnership panel, which will play an important part in ensuring the monitoring of strip searching. And there's still work to be done to actually set this up. We're having conversations with the Met about it to identify the membership and the parameters, but we're looking for that to include head teachers, education leads, the Youth Justice Service, and other people with a vested interest in the safety of children in schools, so that we can ensure that that schools' expectations are being properly clarified and articulated. So that's another important way that we're monitoring how strip searching is being used.
Thank you. Well, I think we'll all look forward to seeing the report when it eventually sees the light of day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just to confirm that some politicians absolutely believe that the powers of the police should stay there to endorse the strip searching, even of juniors, and of course in appropriate circumstances. Absolutely. Now, Assembly Member Moema, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thanks, and I will be brief. So just on what Assemblymember Russell has said, if it is the case that the use of the power fell by 64% against children, that suggests that it was being overused willy-nilly, and there is obviously the question about which groups of children that was being used against. And I think that is the point that the Runnymede Trust and others are making. So I actually attended a conference and spoke about this particular topic with the Runnymede Trust last summer as part of some wider looks at the public sector as a whole, not just policing. And the conversation was nuanced. People understood that there was nuance in the conversation and the way that it is used, but there is no doubt in... Oh, I'll continue. There was no doubt in people's minds and in the evidence that was produced by people and by lawyers and others that that actually... Oh, we go. There was no doubt that there needs to be, yes, the power has been given, but the way in which it's applied is so life-changing that it is really, whether or not it's the right thing to be doing in all of those circumstances, the answer to that clearly is no. The second thing that I really struggled with, and I think you have touched on the benefits of a schools officer, we've focused, obviously, when things have gone wrong, on what happens when that doesn't work. And I think greater clarity around what those officers do and don't do, because what you've described is a bit more of a social services approach to things. And I guess the final thing I would add is where are those officers placed? You know, are they placed in schools in areas like mine, where schools are more likely to request them because it's an additional resource, or are they in a nice middle-class private school where I would imagine people are doing more than just smoking weed of a lunchtime? But those officers are not present, and so there is nobody to witness anything. And there needs to be some consistency in the way that people engage with police, what they do. And I think it would be to the benefit of the police and the public to know where the limits of that role are. So if nothing else, people can decide if they want to do that job or wish to engage with them.
Thank you. I completely agree with your latter description. There is the black communities of London say to us very clearly they feel over-policed and underprotected, and I think this is a good example. So effectively we allocate resources on what we would call a threat, risk and harm basis. Of course, in schools we have to have the invitation of the head teacher, but I think it does lead to what you've just described, and it's why I would rather we start to consider our deployment of safer schools officers alongside our deployment of safer neighbourhood teams, the role of police community support officers, and being clear on the boundaries of what a school responsibility is, what a security responsibility is, what a safeguarding responsibility is, and then how referrals about what might be happening in the community would happen into the safer neighbourhood team. And I think the totality of that structure and the decisions on deployment for all the reasons you say, are absolutely critical.
Lovely, thank you very much. We come to our last section now. We have 20 minutes for this, colleagues, so if we could be concise. We're starting off with Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. Commissioner, and formal congratulations. So I've got a couple of questions and 2 supplementaries, possibly. This section is about economic crime and money laundering, which, of course, I'm sure in your previous role you've had some great experience of. So my first question, Commissioner, sorry, Deputy Mayor, if I can start off with you, and then I'll come to you, Commissioner. Deputy Mayor, can you provide some specific examples of how the Mayor is leading efforts to tackle economic crime in London?
Thank you very much. In terms of economic crime in London, I think it's really important, and we do have, I feel a bit, we do have the expert sitting next to me with the Deputy Commissioner in her previous role from the National Crime Agency. I think it's really important to actually really sort of try to, not explain, to show the context, because the tackling of economic crime is not just, it can't just be the Metropolitan Police, and it isn't just the Metropolitan Police. So there's the role of the Met, there's the role of the National Crime Agency, and there's the role of the Serious Fraud Office. In terms of what we do from City Hall on trying to tackle economic crime, a subset of that we have very much focused on in the Police and Crime Plan, which is around fraud and cyber crime. We are putting together at the moment a problem profile on fraud. We have also convened some roundtables on fraud, but that is only a very small subset of economic crime. 2 specific examples of what the Mayor has been doing to try to lead the way in tackling economic crime. The first one was lobbying the Chancellor to look at to improve the regulations and the registration and the oversight of money service bureaus on the high street, because they are very easy to set up, and the assurance around them is not very strong. So we've been lobbying on that, because that, of course, is where not all of those bureaus, but a proportion of those bureaus are where money is laundered. And the second thing the Mayor's done is has called for much greater transparency around the ownership of those companies that own property in London, where we know that many oligarchs are investing, laundering their money through, or keeping their money in that property in London. The Mayor has been pushing very hard on that in relation to the property ownership in London for various reasons, but one of those reasons because of the economic crime and money laundering that's taking place through that.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So, Commissioner, what level of demand, Deputy Commissioner, what level of demand is money laundering placing on the Met, and how has this changed compared with previous years?
I was delighted to see these questions on the agenda. The reason I say that is because actually money is behind most crime, and therefore I think there is an opportunity for us to refresh our approach in the Met and our relationship with the national bodies that the Deputy Mayor's just mentioned, so the National Crime Agency through the National Economic Crime Centre, the City of London Police, and all the other partners. As you've just recognised in the way you framed the question, there are sort of 4 chunks of economic crime. There's fraud, proactive and reactive. There's money laundering, reactive and proactive. There's asset denial, and let's be honest, none of us want to see criminals make money from their ill-gotten activity. And then there's the growing trend, which is around cryptocurrencies, and actually a growing intelligence pattern that shows all criminals are using cryptocurrency, and therefore making sure that we can keep up with both capability and legislation to deny cryptocurrency from being a route to launder money is important. On your specific, which is about money laundering, so our reactive demand comes into us primarily from suspicious activity reporting. So the National Crime Agency receives suspicious activity reports. Some of them they deal with themselves, and some of them they refer into London. The Commissioner and I are very strongly of the view that we want to move from a reactive response to all types of economic crime. So, for example, the action fraud referrals that come into the City of London Police, and of course we would want to improve how we assess, how we respond to those, but actually we far more want to move upstream. And the best example of that recently is Operation Elaborate. So just to give you the headlines on that. So the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, which is part of the City of London Police response, linked 4,833 reports in the UK from victims, resulting in almost £50 million worth of losses. So between the 6th and the 25th of November, we coordinated a team with the City of London Police and the National Economic Crime Command. And effectively, this was based on a website. So the UK-based website administrator has been charged with a range of offences. We executed 162 search warrants across the UK. 165 suspects were arrested. 130 of the warrants and 138 of the arrests have been within the boundaries of London, the MPS, and we've gathered a huge amount of evidence. So your question was focused on where the reactive demand comes from. I think with economic crime, actually you can suppress demand by just not looking. And actually, I think that's the wrong approach. I think the right approach is to go looking for where the funds are being laundered, because actually that's behind the drug crime in the capital, the robbery in the capital, the where mobile phones end up in the capital. It's all to do with where the money is laundered. So we want to take a far more proactive approach, and we are receiving a report from the teams that work on this into Management Board in March, which is effectively is going to assess what is the changing nature of serious and organised crime in the Metropolitan Police District area and the impact on its victims, what capabilities we need to respond to that, with a view to either reprioritising within existing resource or making the case to the Mayor for future years.
So, Commissioner, as Deputy Commissioner, very specifically asking you about offshore companies and properties. So we now have this something called the Register of Overseas Entities,
yes,
which is now live, and over 20,000 property owners we know have been made public for the first time. There was the end of January deadline, and they had to file their interests. What is the MPS doing to investigate whether these companies were purchased with corrupt money?
This is a really good example, and you're all going to say, I'm doing this because I'm biased, because I used to run them.
You're forgiven.
but this is where the National Crime Agency can add real value. So they will work with us on doing an intelligence assessment of what that register now tells us, and then we will work with them on whether there are places and companies that we should target, places and companies that they're going to target, or they're going to ask the Serious Fraud Office to target. And actually, with the new legislation that's not in yet, but is going to talk about beneficial ownership, which is what the Deputy Mayor just spoke to, there are real opportunities now for us to be proactive. One of my frustrations as Director General of the National Crime Agency was how much property was owned in London without any of us knowing who it was, and deciding who are the right targets to go after in that regard for lots of different reasons needs to be something that we prioritise.
So, to some extent, you touched on my second question, but I'll still put it to you. So, grassroots campaigns like Kensington Against Dirty Money, a group that I know quite well, and I represent the City of London in this building. They've shown that there's a broad coalition of businesses, resident associations, charities, and residents who have enough of luxury properties owned overseas as assets sitting empty. Given that 40% of the offshore companies that own many of these properties, some 13,000 I believe, have not met the deadline for filing their true owners, so the public can really understand who really owns property in London, how will you ensure full compliance?
So there are various routes for compliance with this. The lead for that will sit with the National Economic Crime Centre and the National Crime Agency, but we will want to be a very active partner in that. What we don't want to do is us to take some action, them to take some action. They may have some covert activity that we don't know about. But I cannot tell you how hard I worked when I was in the agency to get this register, because there is significant intelligence about how expensive property in London that actually we would rather is accessible to Londoners is not accessible to Londoners because it is being used as a route to money launder. And this register is the first step. The second step is the beneficial ownership, and where there are proactive opportunities, we should be taking the opportunity to target those people.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I know your question's already been touched on, Assemblymember Mohammed, but do you want to ask it?
Very briefly, if that's okay. So, yes, as the Chair says, it has been touched on, but how would you say the Met is working with the NCA and other law enforcement partners to increase understanding and strengthen its response to economic crime, and obviously including money laundering, if there's anything in addition to what you've said?
So we're very fortunate in the Met. We've got some brilliant economic crime professionals who've run operations like the one I've just described to you. But I do think there is a much greater opportunity, not only on economic crime, but more broadly too, for the Met to become a much more proactive partner with the National Crime Agency and National Economic Crime Centre. Effectively, the National Crime Agency has grown a significant capability as it relates to economic crime, and they would value us being a partner that was prepared to receive proactive referrals from them and to take action on them, and for all reasons of history, but also because I think it really matters to protect the public. That is how we are going to engage with them. We will be inviting their Director General, Graham Bigger, to attend our management board where we discuss the serious and organised crime strategy. I never received such an invitation when I was in that post, so hopefully that will, to them, signal a different intent and direction of travel.
Okay. And just very briefly, do you think that your slightly more junior officers understand the links between the everyday little bits of fraud here, crime there, and how that relates to that wider piece around kind of money laundering and so on? You know, if people are reporting things into the police and they're being closed down without investigation, how does that information get to you?
It's another really great question. So the short answer is, I think our frontline officers that seize quantities of cash off drug dealers know that that's likely to be the proceeds of crime. How we help them join the dots on knowing what to do civilly or criminally, or how they access support from other organisations, how they understand what a suspicious activity report could mean as an intelligence referral. I think there is work that we need to do there. I think we have... So crime has changed in my 32 years of service, stating the blindingly obvious, but it all used to be street-based. And I think we still have a very street-based model. And actually, crime now occurs in three places. It occurs on the street, it occurs in people's homes, and it occurs online. And there is connectivity between all those three things. I'm not sure the way we are structured and way we currently think about things necessarily co-joins those. The first step that we've taken is designing a performance framework that measures what's happening in those different environments. The next step is to help people understand, including in investment terms, that if you can get upstream of crime and take down the enablers, whether they be professional enablers, whether they be getting rid of the London property, whether they be the handlers that handle the mobile phones that are stolen in robberies, that actually is the route to reducing crime on London. Visible presence is really important for reassurance and public confidence, and to attend street fights, pub fights, etc., to deal with things that are being visibly seen in communities. But what happens that is invisible is equally important, and yet it's not always as easy to make the case. But it's great that you asked the question, because it is so the right question to be asking.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Commissioner, does the Met's Economic Crime Command have enough detectives to meet demand?
So we talked, didn't we, about our establishment. Our Economic Crime Command is currently under establishment, like other places in the Metropolitan Police Service. I think there is a question about how many of the people in the Economic Crime Command are detectives or officers with officer powers, and how many of them should actually have other skill sets. How many of them should be data analysts and people who can do digital forensics. Now, of course, they would be police staff. And with our absolute focus on officer numbers, there is a risk that we aren't necessarily building the right shape of thing. So post the report that's coming to Management Board, I need to take a view on actually what economic crime capabilities should look like in London, what should sit as a central specialism, and what should be skills that we are teaching most street-based officers. But we've got some brilliant people doing truly outstanding work. We find it hard to retain them because they are headhunted by the private sector for very big salaries. So I think there is a question about what our future model is.
Okay, thank you. Recently, you did a really good major fraud operation nicknamed iSpoof. What lessons do you think you've learnt from that? And we'll have to be brief because of the time, but have you learnt any lessons from that to put towards anything else that you're thinking of doing?
So the big lesson is that economic crime doesn't happen in a geographic location.
Yeah.
In that job, we took the lead for identifying the ice booth site, but it had tentacles nationally and internationally, and it's why we cannot be the Metropolitan Police standalone, why we have to be an active and collaborative partner, and that for me is the biggest lesson, not only with other law enforcement bodies, but with the private sector, particularly when it comes to economic crime, because there is more that they can do to help us sort of sort the wheat from the chaff in terms of understanding where the real risks are coming from.
Sure, and I'm sure they would want to as well.
Yeah.
Final word, if Assembly Member Garrett wants to come in just for a few minutes.
Yes, I don't know if it'll even take that long. When we looked at particularly fraud, I suppose I'm thinking about, but obviously that links into organised crime. When we looked at that on the committee about a year ago, I think, one of the questions that came out of it is obviously City of London Police act as a sort of focal point for that, and then they pass it on to the Met. And I think, I don't want to put words in their mouth, what I inferred from what they said was that they find it a bit frustrating that the burden falls on them as a very small force when, lots of the crime, or lots of the victims are in the Met area, which is obviously much larger. And there's this question of cases being passed over to the Met and then just sort of disappearing. And obviously there's been stuff in the media as well, particularly around that time about a year ago with action fraud, where it just seems to be a sort of black hole of nothingness, and all these reports go in and people, it's a huge amount of crime that happens that can be quite devastating, and then it just goes nowhere. So where are we with that kind of crime going somewhere?
So we did a lot of work on this when I was in the National Crime Agency. So effectively, Action Fraud is a crime reporting bureau for fraud. And the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau does exactly what you've described, which is they package up that intelligence where they think it's appropriate and passport it out to police forces. I'm not up to date on where the National Crime Agency is with this, but the big challenge was actually how could you take a step back from the individual packages, make sure individual police forces, which I would obviously include the Met, make sure that victims are getting a service, probably through neighbourhood policing teams, while you decide who a lead force might be for a specific investigation. So there are often this whole joining the dot phrase that we've used a lot around standards, but it's the same with fraud. And we trialled a piece of work on a number of packages when I was in the agency about what a tasking coordinating process nationally could look like for economic crime. We did it really well and effectively with cyber. That system works really well across the country, I think because it was new and not everybody understood it. Fraud has been much harder. But we have to get there, because we have to make sure that you are more likely to be a victim of fraud than you are any other crime, and we need to make sure that victims have the level of support they need. And for all of us, that will actually be different. If your life savings have gone, even if they're a small amount, how you feel about it is different to if you're a person who knows how to navigate the financial system and are well protected by insurance. So it needs to be a victim-focused approach, but primarily it needs to be proactive rather than just going package by package, because what's happening in the Met at the moment, our detection figures off packages is really poor, but it's because we are allocating them as singular investigations. And I think if we could work with the National Crime Agency and National Economic Crime Centre and the City of London Police to the point where we agree how we're targeting the people behind those frauds is the right way forward.
Yes, I think you've described the problem, but I suppose my question is what's happening. I suppose in particular the thing that bothers me is that it feels like a risk-free activity for the criminals, that they can do all of this stuff sometimes by phones, you say sometimes by cyber, various other ways, things like what's it called, APP fraud, where people get induced into making bank transfers fraudulently. It feels like that kind of criminal activity is a bit risk-free. So I suppose what I'm looking for is how are we dialing up the risk a bit? Because apart from anything else, that might dial down the level of activity, because I think there's more chance of being caught.
So it's a lot less risk-free than it was a few years ago. The capacity in economic crime nationally, either a National Crime Agency, City of London Police or any of the police forces, was really low. The establishment of the National Economic Crime Centre has upped that capability. I think this piece of work that we're doing on serious and organised crime that will challenge ourselves on the balance between street activity, online activity, and activity in people's homes, primarily targeted at the vulnerable, will take us to a different conversation about the allocation of resource. the operation that I just spoke to you about, Operation Elaborate, is an outstanding operation. Huge compliments to us from the National Crime Agency. We need to be doing more of it, but it will mean a reset of priority.
Okay, I look forward to hearing more about that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm a massive supporter of partnership working. I think the more, especially in this area, the better. Okay, we've come to the end of our questions, everybody. I would like to say on the 8th of March, we do want to be discussing the Shawcross review. We are having difficulties getting hold of the gentleman to see if he'll come. We might be asking colleagues for people to come and discuss that, because I know there's going to be differences of opinion within the colleagues, if nothing else. So we'll be coming to ask for assistance on people on that if we can't get Mr. Shawcross. So I would like to thank you sincerely for attending the meeting today and answering the committee's questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can you note the monthly report from the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the correspondence sent and received? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman, in consultation with party group lead members, to agree any output arising from the meeting? Agreed. Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note A, the work programme for the 22-23 Assembly year, and B, the recent activity undertaken, namely the informal meeting of missing children in London? Can I then ask the committee to delegate authority to me as chairman, in consultation with party group lead members, to agree an output or any output arising from the missing children in London informal meeting, and agree the committee's response to the MPS Turnaround Plan 2025. Thank you. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on the 8th of March 2023 in the Chamber, City Hall. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting.